Myles Garrett has officially requested a trade from the Cleveland Browns. It was posted on X. He made a statement about wanting an opportunity to go chase Super Bowls, not just get to Canton. And now every team's fan base is asking themselves, could our team be interested? Will our team make the call? Let's get it started. This video is being brought to you by BetUS, so use code YouTube150 to get a 150% sign-up bonus on your first deposit, 125% on your next 2 deposits with that code at the top of the description, YouTube150. With the Super Bowl on its way, one of my favorite aspects of BetUS is their NFL specials. You could see Sam Darnold, who's going to be the quarterback for the Vikings. I didn't even know Team Kai versus Team Speed was this thing, but it's over here. So check out BetUS. Myles Garrett has let it be known that he is requesting a trade from the Cleveland Browns, which is very interesting because Andrew Berry, who was at the Senior Bowl, I actually saw Andrew Berry there, didn't speak to him at all because I was kind of in shock a little bit. We were walking down the stairs to get to the field, and he was probably 10 feet in front of me, like he was coming the other direction. And I was like, I think that's the Browns GM. I'm pretty sure that's who that is. Turns out that's exactly who that was. I didn't speak to him, he was kind of in his own group there, but it was pretty awesome to see him in person. Just recently, Andrew Berry was asked about the potential of trading Myles Garrett, and if he was offered 2 first-round picks, if he would do that, essentially he laid out like, no, that would not happen. 2 first-round picks is not going to get that done. And even now, after this request had been posted by Myles Garrett, we're still getting these reports that Cleveland is not entertaining the idea of trading Myles Garrett. They don't want to make this happen. They want him to be part of this rebuild, which financially could actually make a lot of sense for the Cleveland Browns because depending on when he is traded, if he was traded, $36 million in dead cap, where financially they have a ton of dead cap already, could be an absolute disaster for the Cleveland Browns, and they would actually have to make moves to make the trade even possible, like restructuring contracts, moving off players, to just make it possible to even make the trade. So much value for Cleveland would have to come back in terms of what they get in terms of trade assets. Now, numbers have been thrown out there. How much would it cost to bring in a Myles Garrett? And while some of this is going to change, there's going to be flexibility, and there's also the aspect that likely, wherever he goes, he's probably going to get an extension. That's kind of my guess. He's expected to get like 4 years, $140 million because of where his contract is at and how much money he has left on his deal. It's likely that he's going to get an extension wherever he goes, so there's that aspect as well. I think it's important to kind of assume that if your team trades for him, you're also probably going to make him the highest paid edge defender in the National Football League, but maybe not. There's no guarantee to that. However, the numbers right now are kind of roughly around, it would cost the Lions about $20 million for 2025 and about $25 million for 2026. However, the cap hit for 2025 would only be just under $5 million. The situation right now is that Cleveland Browns have created void years on top of void years for Myles Garrett, which is essentially why he has no base salary, constantly restructured his deal. Lions side of things, their amount of what it would cost that we're seeing all over these social media post stems from $19.8 million for 2025, the cap hit and the option bonus that would also be attached to 2026, but that's also not including that signing bonus. And then in 2026, again, it'd be about $25 million roughly, which would be the base salary, which again is basically at a minimum for the next 2 seasons. Then it would also be the $5 million bonus that he is owed. I believe that's on the 5th. It's on the 5th day of the new league year, which I think is like March 16th. It's also, again, the option bonus, and that would put you at, I think it's like $24.76 million, so just around $25 million. The positive to that is the team that acquires that contract would have flexibility, even outside of an extension. Yes, if you gave him an extension, that changes things up, but there's a lot of flexibility. So those large amounts would come into effect for him just being on the roster. That's why those numbers get so high, but again, that's why there's also no guarantees attached to this, which leads to a lot of flexibility. And how a team could negotiate how they want to go about paying Myles Garrett that money and how they want to go about setting up that contract. But again, it feels only likely that he's probably going to have an extension wherever he goes if he is traded. If he's truly looking to go win a Super Bowl, there could be some teams that really truly view it as a window to go win that Super Bowl, and they may not be able to guarantee him that, yes, you're absolutely going to get an extension that you're looking for, whether that's a 4-year deal, but we can bring you over here, we will make the trade, and we're going to go see what happens these next couple of seasons. So I don't want to say it's a guarantee, but that's what it would look like. So financially, a lot of teams could make it happen for this year. It's the numbers as a whole, which some teams would have to figure out. And I think the Lions fall right into that category when you look at the amount of extensions that they have coming up. Now, the positive is, I think if you just roll through the Lions roster, what the Lions have that I don't think every team has, and I don't think many teams have in terms of flexibility, is that the players that the Lions may have to negotiate with for flexibility reasons, if this trade was made specifically for 2026, are guys that we all kind of believe at this point that we'd be able to trust that if we did that, the risk of, oh, we locked in guaranteed money here wouldn't be as risky because we're comfortable with those players. And a few of those guys that we're going to talk about here in a second, we're pretty comfortable are going to be here long term anyway. So the fact that the Lions have gotten so much early production out of a lot of their draft picks, and then you look at the extension that they've given out. So for example, if you go beyond, you go to Lee McNeil, to Amon-Ra St. Brown, who recently got an extension, Penei Sewell, those 3 guys could open up the Lions in terms of flexibility, in terms of restructuring their contracts a few years out from now. Particularly for 2026, where they currently only have only $22 million in cap space according to Over the Cap. The good side of that is they have a lot of their needs, I would say kind of needs. They have a lot of core pieces already under contract. That's why it looks like that, because so many of those players were given those long-term deals. And because we're confident in those players, the potential restructure, or maybe another extension, but probably unlikely that early just because of where they'd be at in their deals, but the potential of like, hey, restructuring these guys like St. Brown, which could get up to $21 million, or Penei Sewell, which could get up to $15 million, or Ali McNeil, which could get up to $17 million. Even a guy like Jared Goff, when you look at his contract situation, I think it's a little bit different, but him holding almost a $70 million cap hit in 2026 actually drops back down. $55 million of that being in base salary, again, opens flexibility, whether that's a longer term extension or maybe even more likely just a restructure, or even an out that potentially opens after 2026 if the Lions wanted to try to go that direction. So I think that's a huge positive. The next part of this is going to be the trade assets that it would cost. Now, people have been throwing out the Khalil Mack trade as kind of a comparison, and I think it's an interesting comparison. I think the trade could be similar. Again, if we take Andrew Berry to his word and he truly was only going to move him for more than 2 first-round picks, then maybe this would be more likely, because we've seen projections of a first, third, and fifth would he get it done. But if we go back to that Khalil Mack trade, what it took at the time was a first-round pick from the Bears, which was pick 24, a future first-round pick, which ended up being pick 19 from Chicago, as well as a third-round pick, which was pick 81, and a sixth-round pick in exchange for Khalil Mack, a second-round pick, which was pick 43. Essentially, when I flip that around, I think the most basic way we could look at that as Lions fans is potentially like this. A similar deal could be Lions giving up their first-round pick this season, which would be their 28th pick in the draft this year. Also, their future first-round pick, which likely is going to have, hopefully, less value than what those Chicago Bears picks did, even this year before starts back. So that does matter. It matters about the draft class that season. And then also, they would probably have to throw in at least, I would think, an extra third-round pick. And the fact that they have now 2 third-round picks set for next season because of the 2 third-round comp picks that they got from Aaron Glenn, I would think you'd want to do it next year, because if you trade away your first-round pick this year and also your third-round pick this season, you'd be really light at the top in terms of moves that you can make. Or if you gave away like your first and second-round pick, then you'd really have not much flexibility whatsoever. But having 2/3 next year, maybe that's kind of the baseline of where things could start at for the Lions. I don't think that looking for much of like, hey, let's get a player in return. We don't have any cap space, basically. We're not going after that. We need draft picks, whether it's to go find a quarterback, just kind of revamp everything here. And in a deep defensive front class, that could entice the Browns, where it's like, well, if we're going to do it, let's get a draft pick for now. Let's hurry this process up, because that's what we need assets for. And let's go get a potential replacement, even though he won't be a replacement for Myles Garrett, in this year's draft. Let's go after that. So I think that there is a path for it happening. It may even cost more than that for Myles Garrett, because Myles is one of the best edge rushers in football. But when Khalil Mack was dealt, he was also one of the best edge rushers in football. He's coming off a season in 2017 with 79 pressures, 53 stops, earned a 90.1 Pro Football Focus grade that season. He was outstanding. And Myles Garrett's been on a kind of a similar tear. But I think when you do look at that situation of what happened with the Raiders, there's things to, I think, be aware of with that situation between the Raiders and Bears, because when the Bears made that trade, initially it looked like it was going to work out really well. The Bears pushed their chips in. They said, let's go get Khalil Mack. They went 12-4 the first year. They were led by the defense. Then the double doink happens, and they lose their first playoff game. Then you move forward where Mitchell Trubisky is not the quarterback of the future, as we saw with the Chicago Bears, and that led to a downfall alongside of the fact that Khalil Mack was never really healthy going forward. Like 2019, 2020, he was missing games. He was playing through injuries. While he was still productive, 8.5 sacks, 9 sacks, it wasn't at that level that first season was, where double-digit sacks, 12-4 record, fantastic defense, the immediate impact that he made. So the injuries played a lot into it, as well as not having a quarterback for Chicago at the time. It just led to things kind of falling apart, even after an amazing start. When you look at Myles, he's a little bit on the older side now, 29 years old. If you had him for 2 years on a contract, that wouldn't be terrible. But once you get into the potential extension idea, now all of a sudden I think the age has to creep into the conversation. It doesn't mean it's going to be everything, but there is always that risk. The positive for Myles Garrett is really going back the last 4 seasons, the dude has been healthy. And statistically speaking, 16 sacks, 16 sacks, 14 sacks, 14 sacks. So really there's no recent memory to believe that this is going to be a problem with Myles Garrett. Just some things happen, and when you push your chips in, if things go wrong, there's unfortunately a bigger downside to that, and the Browns know all too well about that being the case. As for the Lions right now, why does this make sense? Why does it not make sense? Well, I think first off, in terms of why this could make sense, is the flexibility. As I touched on with the future deals, whether that's an extension, you need to be able to move some money around, or even if it's not an extension, you were able to just hold him for 2 years. Though obviously the risk there is if you give up 2 firsts and a third, and you have the guy for essentially 2 years, and then you move off him, whether that's, hey, we're going to let him go, then he becomes a free agent. Yeah, you get a comp pick out of it, I'm sure, but you'd be getting a third-round comp pick. Or there's a scenario of kind of do what the Bears did, essentially, which is like, hey, a few years later, we're going to trade him. Now, that would be weird, because you would basically be probably trading Myles Garrett after 1 season, unless he got the new deal and then you trade him on the new deal. Trading him after 1 year would be like, we're going in this year, We gave up 2 firsts and a third for it. The next year, we're going to trade you for less value. Specifically, we're going to get less back in return, but at least maybe we'll get something back in return. So that's really risky. So why it would make sense is, number one, you have Zadarius Smith, who currently is under contract next season. You have a real out there to save money because it's just over $5 million in cap space if he was cut for the next couple seasons. No longer have to deal with any of the roster bonuses that are set on his deal that are optional. And then also, of course, he doesn't have any guarantees this season. So you would open up a little bit of cap space by moving off Zadarius and replacing him with Myles Garrett, which would essentially cover that cap hit for the season, depending on how they decided to play this out with Myles Garrett. The next aspect is the guys that you currently have under contract. Again, there's a really nice foundation that the Lions have built here for the next couple seasons in terms of needs. For example, if you go all the way to 2026, you ask yourself, what are the Lions going to need? Well, they're going to need receivers, and they're going to need specifically Jameson Williams potentially on an extension, so you have that one that's coming up. But you have your quarterback, you'd have your running back room looking good, you'd have your tight ends in Laporta and Brock Wright both under contract through 2026. Their needs would be on the defensive line, which at that point you would have Myles Garrett, so then I guess in terms of needing another edge rusher, maybe that's not as much of a need, but you're expecting the Lions are going to want to re-sign Hutchinson, who was the best pass rusher before he got hurt. Aiden Hutchinson had a 35% pass rush win rate this past season. Number 2 was Myles Garrett at 23%. Okay, just to put that in perspective of how amazing Hutchinson was through the first 4.5 games this past season until the Dallas injury. He was ridiculous. So there's that aspect. Lions would probably want to repay him. Wouldn't want to pay him. So you'd have Jameson that could get a pretty big deal. You'd have Hutchinson that could easily be the highest paid edge defender at that time. You would also likely have Kirby Joseph, who's going to get paid a lot of money. Now that could take place this offseason because the Lions currently don't really have any safeties under contract for that year. You'd have your core linebacker and Jack Campbell. You'd need someone alongside him. And at cornerback, it's going to depend on the development. To make this make sense, when you're losing 2 first-round picks, especially even if they're later picks, is that the Lions, number one, need to continue to hit on draft picks, find guys second and third round that can be starters, maybe even later get a couple in there. But there's also the aspect of the guys they've already drafted that haven't really proven themselves. Mahogany potentially saying that I am the starter, I am a future starter, and it looks like it so far, but him becoming that guy. It would be guys like Rakestraw and or Branch and or Terrion. You feel great like that's the starting outside corner. Hopefully both of those hit. You would need things like that to go right. A lot of the other things we feel good about, but there's a couple spots that you'd probably have to have go right because you would just have less flexibility in terms of free agency and less flexibility in terms of draft picks to go address those spots if the young players like that just don't hit across the board. Not saying they all do, but you'd probably need a few to hit. The good thing is a lot of those guys have kind of already proven themselves. So I think the Lions are in a good spot because even though they don't have a ton of cap space, they do have this flexibility with deals they've already given out, and they also feel good about a lot of these players in terms of what the O-line would look like. I think for the Lions, ideally, if you're going to make this trade, probably be paying the 2 highest edge defenders in football, as well as at that point, unless you move off of Jared Goff after 2026, which there would still be dead cap, but it's much more of an out, like $30 million. You would then be paying one of the higher paid quarterbacks in football, which again, there's flexibility, but you would have a lot of massive extensions at the exact same time. You can make it work, but they all need to hit, essentially. You can't have guys that are missing in there that need to be replaced.
Now, I'm about to talk about this more, but I think the key really comes after those first 2 years with Myles Garrett. I think the first 2 years, you could definitely make it happen, but it's after that, because once you start restructuring those deals, now you push more money into the back end, but then there's also the aspect of a guy like Aiden Hutchinson, for example. So when he's up for his 5th-year option, that'll probably get picked up. The Lions can always loop it right back into his new contract extension, so they can keep some of these numbers a little bit lower on the front end while also taking off guarantees into the back end. So they have that flexibility, which is what now they're set up to have with some of these earlier contracts, the extensions that they've given out last season. Now they're set to get to a point where that starts coming back into play, where now there's flexibility, and then you can reset that once again. But that's also why it's key for a guy like Garrett specifically is after those first 2 years that even if he got a new extension, because that's most likely, you would have to leave a ton of flexibility so the Lions could move off Garrett.
The interesting aspect, though, to me is I don't think it's necessary. I'm definitely not one that feels like a move like this is necessary. I think there's a path that it could make sense, that it could actually be done, but I don't think it's necessary because, I'll show this graphic here. This is the Lions of last season without Aiden Hutchinson. Now, there's so many more factors like Carlton Davis. There's the fact that I didn't include the Dallas game in the first 4, even though they held them to 9 points. There's a lot of other factors that go into this. But just to give an idea, the first 4 games, Lions defense versus last 13. Run defense took a step back without Hutchinson. I thought that's where, outside of pressure, of course, we missed him a ton in the playoffs. We missed really all of our starters. Marcus Davenport, we missed all those guys in the playoffs. A guy that could make more plays against the run, that could get over gas, because we just weren't having that with Muhammad at defensive end and Josh Paschal, no John Kaminsky. We just didn't have those guys that were going above and beyond against the run. So we truly missed just that. The sacks obviously took a little bit of a step back. The pressure rates at one point was actually higher without Hutchinson, but we had to change out how we did things stylistically, which hurts as well. But the point is that the Lions didn't take a complete drop off. I think it was mainly the accumulation of injuries. When you have your linebacker position, which gets kind of depleted, I thought the defensive end accumulation. If Marcus Davenport was healthy for the playoffs, I think we'd have been in a much different spot. It was just a cute couple pieces. If Derek Barnes is out there in that game, that could change a lot because he can stack and shed blocks. Maybe he makes more plays against the run. Plus, I just didn't think we came with a good game plan anyway. That's where I'm at with that. I thought Washington, for a large part, regardless of who we had in the front seven, I just thought we had a poor game plan to stop the run. I think that was the biggest issue overall. But the point is I think these numbers say it. I think the eye test says it. The Lions don't need to make this move. The one concern with Hutch is what he's going to look like coming back from the injury. If he's like he was last year, you have the best pass rusher in football, who's probably a better run defender than Myles Garrett, which is the one concern. Is not a concern. He's a very good run defender, but he's not like the best run defender. He's just probably the second best pass rusher last season, if you include Hutchinson, and the best over the last handful of years from a consistency standpoint. He's the best pass rusher in football. So you'd have the best duo probably of defensive ends or edge rushers ever, I would think, in football, like ever on the same team. But it's the long-term contract that becomes the issue there. So can you open flexibility where if we gave him a 4-year deal, there's an out after 2 years so that we could trade him away? I think that's the way something like this would probably have to go down, is there would have to be flexibility the Lions could get back out of the deal, and it would truly be like we're doing this for a couple-year move. That way they're not completely tied to, we gave him all this guaranteed, and then also on top of that, he's stuck here for 4 seasons now. And now it makes it difficult because we're letting go of young guys that are the core of this team, and we can't replenish that with draft picks because we don't have 2 first-round picks. So for me, I think it's possible. I think there's a way to do it. And if Myles Garrett is truly looking for a Super Bowl and he just wants to go to the best spot, if he was interested in that from Detroit and the Lions were willing to give Cleveland draft picks and he wasn't all about like, let me get the most money I can, I think they could make this work. I think draft picks wise, they could make this work. The problem becomes if that number becomes the highest paid in football and there's not a lot of flexibility in the back end, I think it makes it really difficult to have any misses going forward. It makes the Lions' margin for error very small. They've proven they could draft well enough, I think, to make something like this happen, but I think the margin for error just becomes super small, and that's not the world the Lions want to live in because they want consistent, sustained success. So my guess is the Lions won't make this happen, but I would bet that they would make a call. I'd bet that they'd want to get a conversation with Myles Garrett and just kind of gauge the interest of how much this would actually cost. I do think there's a path for it making sense, but I also think obviously the likelihood is that they're not going to make this move. But I do think there's a path this could make sense. I just like the aspect of there's flexibility. The Lions aren't pressed to do this. They can have a great defense without Myles Garrett as they did last season. They still have one of the best pass rushers. They still created a very high pressure rate. The sacks, yes, dropped, but you also have Zadarius Smith coming back who didn't get to play with Hutchinson this past season. As of now, we'll see if they continue to that, which is something that's definitely on the table. They can keep him for this next year. And then you also have the fact that you look at it from there's a draft that's loaded with front 7 pieces. So the Lions could come into this draft, they wanted to add somebody and just add more depth to that spot, and then you feel great about the future. I think it's loaded this year. I'm still diving into that. As I'm watching Kyle Kennard today, I'm like, this guy is awesome. So the point is, I don't think this is anywhere near necessary. I don't think for the Lions to get a Super Bowl, they have to make this move, and I don't think it fits directly into what Brad Holmes' idea is. But I think if there was flexibility with Myles Garrett in terms of the money that he was looking for, and the price wasn't 4 first-round picks and it was 2 first-round picks and throw me something else, I think that there's actually a path that this could make sense for the Lions, and they could actually do it. I don't think it's completely impossible. This isn't possible, makes no sense. I think there's both sides to this, but my guess is it won't happen. Either way, though, I think it's super interesting, and I want to give my initial thoughts. Some of the thoughts in the comments below. Shout out to BetUS for sponsoring today's video, and I'm out.